But Jesus turns love into action. Go and do. Jesus doesn't just try and restrict us from doing harm. He sends us out on a mission. Hey guys, we're doing a series at the moment. It's called Love Does, because we believe that love is actually a verb. It's something that we do. And that Christians are called to live a very different life. Christians are called to actually live a life of love. And here's a little recap in case you have missed some of these. These are all on YouTube. If you do want to catch up, I know you're all going to do that this week. Say, yes, Pastor Dan. Thank you. Number one, how love is the great work of your life. That was our first week. And then we talked about some myth busting about love. And then we looked at how our words are our love superpower. And then last week, we looked at this very serious issue, was how our love for God must be accompanied by deeds. And next week, we're going to look at how to love when you are hurt, or how to love when you've actually hurt someone else. How to actually love in that situation, because it can be very complicated to know what to do. This week, I want to talk about the rules of love. I reckon there's basically two categories of people in the world. Those who love rules and see them as guardrails to a holistic, flourishing life. Put your hand up if you're one of those people that think rules are beautiful and wonderful, yes? You put your hand up because I told you to. That was good. Yes, Pastor Dan. And those who see rules as suggestions only. Those people, put your hand up. You're not going to because you think you're not going to do what I said. I'm probably in that category myself, okay? There's a whole spectrum in between, I know, and it can change. How we feel about rules can change depending on how we are going at the time. Let me give you an ethical, moral conundrum. What do you do when you're finished with your groceries, packing them in your boot? What do you do with your trolley? You put it back, don't you? Yeah, we have a mission to love the world at Lifepoint. So all of us here put it back straight away. What about when you're in a hurry and you're in a rush and you've got somewhere to be and someone needs to see you? I suddenly find my rules changing. My rule now is, and you've done this before, I wouldn't want to put anyone out of a job, would I? I want to make sure everyone's got a job. You know you've used it, I can tell. There's someone, I see that person getting paid to pick them up. I'm loving them by letting them do it. Ethical conundrums. What are the rules of your life? They change. How about this ethical conundrum? I had this one this week. This is a question for any Australian here, okay? Like, in Australia, just say you're turning right. You're driving, for all the drivers here, you're turning right, and everyone's banked up in the right lane, but no one's in the left lane. How far can you go until you cut in? That's the ethical conundrum. Some of you are like, you just go to the back of the line. You've been in the right lane for the past hour, ready. And how many people here are okay with cutting in a little bit later? Right, I'm actually one of those people that cuts in right at the end because I'm trying to help the flow of traffic, people. I'm trying to help it flow. And it depends on how much of a rush I'm in, is it where the rule changes in my mind. Our rules govern our life, but we're happy to stretch the rules depending on what we're going through at the time. Here's the reality, is that we are innately moral beings. Now, we don't measure up to that morality. That's the big thing. Is that lots of people would say, I'm a good person, but deep down they're like, I don't even measure up to my own rules. But there's something about humanity. You don't have to be a Christian kind of church person to believe this, but there's something about humanity that just says we know that we can't live however you want. We know that there's a code inbuilt within us. I was talking to a guy at Lifepoint, actually. He's been coming to Lifepoint recently, and in his past life, he was very heavily involved in bikie gangs. And he was in this one particular gang, and he was telling me all about how it worked and how they kicked him out for this. And I suddenly realised even bikie gangs, who when it comes to crime and violence, don't care about the rules at all, and yet they've got a huge moral code, don't they? It's like you have to listen to the hierarchy. You have to protect each other. You have to be loyal to the group. Because all of us have moral codes and rules. And all throughout history, I'm going to give you a bit of a history lesson today. people, religious people and philosophical people, smart people, leadership people, have all tried to think, how do we summarize the rules that we live by? Let me go through some of the rules throughout history. The first one, which is the lowest form of ethics or morality, is called the Iron Rule. The Iron Rule says, do to others whatever you want before they do it to you. Basically, it's survival of the fittest. It's kill or be killed. It's survival of the strongest. This is a rule that's operated in our humanity since the world began. It's the rule that animals use. This is the rules that toddlers use sometimes. Maybe when you were growing up in school, this is the rule of your playground. We see it all the time, this kind of rule, don't we? We see it in our nation. This is the rule that many European settlers had when they first arrived in this land that we're in right now. They said, we are stronger, we are better, so we're actually going to, before someone else takes this land, we're going to take it. And we're going to pretend there's actually no one here, and we're going to displace and murder them. It's called the Iron Rule. And it seems disgusting, but for most of history, people haven't seen this as disgusting. This has been a pretty good rule to live by. Like we talk about, Alexander, the Macedonian conqueror, when he conquered most of the Greek and kind of Roman, or the Romans weren't around them, but the kind of Asian world. And what do they call him in history books? Alexander the Great. And why was he great? He was really good at the Iron Rule. Someone's going to get you, so you may as well use your strength to get them first. Then there's a slightly higher rule. It's called the Bronze Rule. Some people have called it this. And the Bronze Rule says, do to others as they have done to you. This is called tit for tat. Now, this actually sounds a bit bad, but it's a level up, because now it's meant to be limiting human suffering. Now it's meant to be like, hey, if someone has not hurt you, don't go out of your way and hurt them. Does that make sense? Now, it sounds nice, but the problem is that you know that revenge always goes a little bit further each time, doesn't it? So the cycle kind of spins out of control. Who had a sibling and growing up, and when they hurt you, I remember saying this to my brother, ouch, that hurt. Now, that didn't hurt. You're like, I'll show you what you did. And you put a little bit of extra mustard on it on the way through, because I'm just going to level it up slightly. The Bronze Rule is actually, it's an ancient rule. The Code of Hammurabi, which is a Babylonian legal text composed in about 1755 BC, says an eye for an eye. And it's in the Bible as well. Did you know that? This rule, this kind of tit for tat rule is in the Bible. Exodus 21:24, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. And the idea is it's trying to limit human suffering. Don't go out and do whatever you want. Don't go kill someone if they've only hurt your arm. Just take their arm off instead. Unhealthy, you might say. But I see that in my own life sometimes. Where do you see the Bronze Rule coming out in your life? Remember when I first got married to Steph, I saw there was a lot of Bronze Rule going on as we were very young, married, trying to work out how to live a life and have a household. And we kept wondering why all these dishes kept piling up in the sink. Who's doing this? It's a lot of dishes. We need to buy some new dishes. And I would ignore it, so she would ignore it. Tit for tat, you haven't done your bit. Well, I'm not going to do my bit either. The Bronze Rule. And then we see in history, gradually this new rule emerges. You see it actually in most religions, most worldviews have their highest ethic one level up from Bronze Rule. I call it the Silver Rule. Many people have called it this. And the Silver Rule says, you might have heard something similar to this before. Listen, it says, do not do to others what you would not want done to you. I'm going to show you a few texts from different religions and ancient worldviews. Ancient Persian says, whatever is disagreeable to yourself, do not do unto others. Greek, Buddhism, Hinduism, Confucianism, there's actually so many different worldviews. In fact, most humanist or atheist or agnostic worldviews actually say the same thing. Don't do any harm. If you wouldn't want it done to you, do not do it to others. The silver rule is a really good rule. It communicates a deep truth. And it can, if we can pull it off, and I don't think we can usually, but if we can pull it off, it can lead to greater human flourishing. Some of you this morning are very uncomfortable that you're in church and you're reading sacred texts from a different religion. You're thinking, Dan, what are you doing here? Why are we looking at this? Thing is, guys, we shouldn't be surprised when we see truth emerge from other religions. Because all the people that came up with these religions, guess what? They were made in the image of God. So here's the reality, is that there is some truth in, I think, every worldview. I think every religion, I'm not saying this is all true, I disagree with most of it probably, but this part is pretty good. It's called God's general revelation. And everyone says the same thing, basically. The silver rule. Don't do it if you wouldn't want it done to you. Now, here's the part where many people say, okay, Dan, all religions are the same. All religions are basically saying the same thing, because it pretty much looks like it. Like, didn't Jesus say something pretty similar to that? We're going to get to that in just a moment. Maybe all religions are pretty the same. They're all talking about some divine goodness and all about how we need to be better and we need to be, not hurting people. Isn't that a good thing? They sound the same. They sound very similar in a shallow look. But when you look deeply, which is what we're going to do this morning, you will see they're actually incredibly different. 2,000 years ago, Jesus Christ came along. And he, like all great teachers and great philosophers, he summarized his sacred text. He took all the ethics and morality in his sacred text, which is the Jewish Bible, the Hebrew Bible, we call it the Old Testament, and he summarized the entire thing in one sentence. It's brilliant. You might have heard it before. It's from the Sermon on the Mount. He summarized it all. It's Matthew 7, verse 12. This is, I think, the most famous sentence in the entire world. Marketers and communicators spend so long trying to come up with ways that are memorable and catchy, that are going to, a message that's going to last. And Jesus just says this one sentence. He's brilliant. He's so creative. He's so intelligent, Jesus. He says this one phrase and it's gone down in history forever as the most famous sentence in the world. That's what I think. You ready for it? You probably have heard it before, no matter what your church background is. I call it the golden rule, or I'd actually prefer the Jesus rule. It sounds like this. So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. What is the difference between Jesus' golden rule and the silver rule? Because I think it's a small but absolutely revolutionary difference. I think there's actually two big differences that change how we live. Can you see the difference? There's two things. Number one, this is really important, he changes it from do not to do. The Greek word there is poiete. He turns love into something you do. And according to historians, this had never been said before. William Barclay says, this is something which had never been said before. It is new teaching and a new view of life and of life's obligations. There is no parallel to the positive form in which Jesus put it. Jesus came and gave a new rule. A.B. Bruce writes, the negative, do not do, confines us to the region of justice. The positive takes us into the region of generosity or grace. So here's the problem with the silver rule, friends, okay? I like the silver rule. I think it's a good rule, but here's the problem with it. It says do no harm. And it actually, while sounding nice, do no harm leads to passive individualism. And do no harm, it is like the creed of our culture right now, which I think is a good thing, by the way. I like a culture that says do no harm rather than one that says do harm if you can, which has been some cultures in history. I like the fact that ours says do no harm, okay? I'm glad to be living in Australia where most people would say do no harm. But the problem with do no harm is that it's so individual and it's so passive and it's so consumeristic. And have we ever seen a more passive, individualistic, consumeristic culture than the one we are living in right now? I remember this story I was reading about. I heard it in a podcast, actually. There was this atheist scientist, and he was a quantum physicist. And if you want to know what that is, I have no idea. You just Google it. But he was into like quantum theory, and apparently he was looking at quantum physics, and he had this epiphany. He said, there is just no way this world is here by chance. This doesn't make sense. There has to be some kind of divine, intelligent being out there. So he went on a spiritual quest. And like most people that are Westerners, he thought it definitely isn't in the church. I've got to find it somewhere else. Definitely isn't in Christianity. So he went to China and then he went to India and he found a Hindu guru. And this guru was so smart and saying all these wise, beautiful things. And he's like, wow, I've found this wonderful truth. This guru was trying to teach him how to live and get all of his stuff right. And then one day he said he was walking along and he was in India and there was this beggar with a child on the side of the street, and they were both dying of starvation, he could tell. You could see their rib cages. And he walked past and he was like, what? And he knelt down and started to try and give them some food and wanted to pick them up and bring them home. And the Hindu guru said, leave him, he's on his own journey and you're on yours. Don't harm him, but continue. And he was like, what? And it blew his mind that someone could say that. He said, that can't be right. That can't be the way we were meant to live. And so he left India and he came back to America. And he actually converted to Christianity in the end, by the time I was hearing him on the podcast. Because there's this difference. There's this golden rule. I'm not saying anything, I'm not trying to pay out Hinduism or anything like that, but that's just the reality. I heard a Hindu leader the other day, and the Hindu leader said the problem in India right now is that almost all the charitable work being done in India is being done by Christian organizations, and that's a problem. And I'm thinking, why is it a problem? Because they're the ones that want to do it. They're the ones that say, no, love does. Love leaves where you are and it goes across and it helps and it loves and it sacrifices. I was hearing someone talk about the other day how in Africa, when it gets really dangerous, when civil war breaks out, the humanitarian organizations like UNICEF and the Red Cross, brilliant organizations, by the way, when it gets dangerous, they leave, which makes sense because they've got to protect their employees. And the guy said, do you know who doesn't leave, though, when it gets dangerous? The Christian missionaries. Because they're not employees. They're servants of God, sent to love. Love. Sent to imagine, what would I want someone to do for me? So go and do. Go and do it. This is the Christian life. This is the way. As a Mandalorian once said, this is the way. Jesus says, here's how we live a Christian life, guys. If you want someone to encourage you, go encourage someone. If you want someone to show you grace, because you're stuffed up, but you're trying your best, go and show someone grace. If you'd love someone to listen to you, go and listen to someone. The silver rule lets you ignore people. But Jesus turns love into action. Go and do. Jesus doesn't just try and restrict us from doing harm. He sends us out on a mission. Amen? So what's the second difference? I think that's a pretty important difference. But I actually think there's two differences. And I think the second one is even more important. So in everything, do to others. Do you know what the second difference is? That word so. In Greek, it's the word oun. What does so mean? It means therefore. So if you read a text like that, the problem in church was sometimes just quoting one Bible verse is you go, well, what's that so about? So how can I do this part? Well, he's just said something important. So let's just go back and see what he's just said. And here's what he says. This is in the most famous sermon of all time, the Sermon on the Mount. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives. The one who seeks finds. And to the one who knocks, the door will be opened. Which of you, if your son asks for bread, it should be up there. If your son asks for bread, we'll give him a stone. Or if he asks for fish, we'll give him a snake. If you then, though you are evil, so, you're a pretty awful bunch. If you know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? So in everything, do to others as you would have them do to you. For this sums up the laws and the prophets. The second big difference between Jesus and everybody else is that Jesus provides the resources for loving action. Jesus puts love into action, and then he provides the actual resources you need to love in action. Does that make sense? Are you with me? He's like, if you ask, I promise you, I'm going to give you what you need. See, every other worldview and religion basically says, I need you to be better. You're doing okay, but I need you to be better. God's up here, the ideal human's up here, and this is you. If you could just a little bit. And then we get to Jesus, and it seems he actually goes even harder. He says, now you've got to do more, and now you've got to love others. And the problem with a sermon like Love Does is, and if I'm honest, I've felt this the past few weeks, is that you can be sitting there thinking, oh, geez, Dan, all right. Now I've got to try and fit mowing my neighbour's lawn into my schedule. Now I've got to try and fit doing more. How is this going to work? I'm so busy. I'm so tired. People are so annoying. Have you met my boss? How am I going to do it? Here's the good news, guys. You're always going to hear good news at Lifepoint, just so you know. All right? That's what the gospel is. It's always good news. It's sometimes challenging, but it's always good. Here's the good news. Jesus says, I'm going to give you what you need to be loving in action. I'm going to give you more than what you need. You're actually going to find you've got too much. Just talking to someone on the way in this morning, and he said, I just cannot believe the grace of God in my life, Dan. It never stops. And it never stops. Every morning there's a full, fresh plate of grace and love laid out for you. So if you're sitting there thinking, you're feeling guilty this morning, you're thinking, oh man, I can't do this. I've been yelling at my kids this week. I haven't been loving well. I haven't been loving in action. I haven't been considering what people would like me to do for them. Good news. This huge sacrifice Jesus is calling you to make is no sacrifice at all, ultimately. Because Jesus says, I'm going to give you what you need. You're never going to miss out. I'm going to give you energy and love and forgiveness and resources. Because he goes first. It's basically what Jesus is trying to say. He said, I made the first move when it comes to love. So you can make the second one. The other day, on Monday actually, Steph said to me, Dan, I'm going out and I need you to cook food for the kids. Now, to an ordinary human, that would be a very simple task. To me, I not only am not good at cooking, I don't really know how to cook. And before you think I'm some sexist person who's like, why didn't you learn to cook? My wife is very good at cooking. She loves cooking, and she doesn't like me cooking at all. Can you nod your head so people know that I'm not being chauvinistic pig? Good. And she doesn't want me to. So I haven't learnt the skills because she doesn't want me to. Every now and then she needs me to. And I'm sitting there, it's like someone's just said to me, hey, I need you to build a car. I'm like, I don't know, where do we keep the pots? I'm not quite that bad, but I have been in the past. So what does Steph do? She doesn't leave me. You might be there this morning going, Dan, I don't know how to love. This whole series has been about loving people. I don't know how to do it. I'm stuck. God doesn't leave you. Steph didn't leave me in that moment. She condescended to me in a good way. She came down from on high And she said, Dan, I've got 500 grams of mince already measured out, ready to go. I've already bought the pasta and I've bought the spaghetti bolognese jar. And the pots are in the top. The pots are right there and the right one's on the left. And you know what, friends? We had spag bowl on Monday and it was beautiful. I'm pretty much a chef, ladies and gentlemen. It was so good. And some of you are like, Dan, that's not called cooking. That's called heating something up. But anyway, baby steps. That's what the love of God passed on is like. God's like, I've already got the bit for you. Just do that one bit. I've already laid it out for you. I've already died for you. I've already poured out my life for you. And my Holy Spirit's come into you. And you're thinking, I don't want to forgive that person. And Holy Spirit's in you goes, but I do. And I'd love to. So let's do it together. God provides the resources if we ask. Do you want to ask? Why don't we ask right now, hey? Why don't you bow your heads? Let's just ask God. Oh, God. I'm sorry, Jesus, that you're not looking at the A-team this morning. You're looking at pretty ordinary people. And I'm putting myself in that category, God. I did not get this right. I didn't even get it right to my own children this week. I so easily become selfish, busy, that it's hard to even notice someone, let alone consider how I would want them to treat me and then going and doing that. So Lord, all I have is a willingness to ask you. All I have is need. And we thank you, Jesus, that you say all you need is need. All you need to follow you is need. And there's a lot of need in this room this morning, God. There's a lot of tired and hurt and broken and sinful. And anxious people. So we're coming and we're doing what you've asked us to do, God. We are asking you for what we need to be a force of love in this world, to love our colleagues and our neighbours and our kids and our parents-in-law and our friends and our spouses, to go out to anyone that comes into our sphere, to think, what would I want them to do for me? To use our God-given creativity and imagination and going and doing likewise. So God, give it to us, I pray. Give it to us, I pray. What would you love someone to do for you today? Encourage you, give you some money, help you out, invite you out for dinner. What would you love someone to do for you? Go and do likewise. Help us. Help us. Help me, Jesus. Amen. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that. If you did and you want more Lifepoint content, subscribe to our channel right now. Or if you're in the area around Moreton Bay or Rothwell, head to our service. Sunday, we'd love to see you there. lifepoint.org.au for all the details. We'll see you soon.